Can I ask a question about the sporting structure
Yeah.
and kind of the implications of what the second half of the season might bring for them? I think there's obviously a ton of chatter about their job performance out on the interwebs. You see it just as much as I do.
It's with every, and what I would say it's with every club because I
Yep.
look at Villa. There are Villa fans who are putting on the social media sack Monchi. Lots of Villa fans, which is crazy. There's Tottenham fans who are constantly going for Johan Langer. What does Johan Langer do? Honestly, it's the same.
Part and
Probably
parcel, right?
90%. Yeah, and Arsenal fans are saying, "Well, we've got no one to do anything since Edu left." So it's not just a Chelsea thing. It is, but let's talk about it anyway. Let's discuss it.
Yeah. I mean, this is it does feel like, especially for a January window, which I would pretty much always call low stakes unless there's like catastrophic
Yeah,
injury, right?
yeah,
It does feel like there's a bit of pressure building here. That that the team has obviously gone through a pretty bad slump. I think there are some pretty obvious holes in the squad that has been extraordinarily expensively assembled, and there are questions being asked about how Robert Sanchez is your number one goalkeeper for 2 seasons, when he was clearly not the right profile for that job. You have, I think, some interesting quotes from Maresca about whether the team is better now than they were 2 months ago. I How much pressure realistically do you think is on the sporting structure for not only just the transfer window, which is what it is, but through the second half of the year? Like if Chelsea finished sixth or seventh, are they in jeopardy at this point?
not that I know of, and not that I think. No. So that's that
Yeah.
bit of the question. I'll come back to that. The starting point is everybody who works at Chelsea is under pressure. Everybody. Chelsea's a juggernaut of a club. It's massive. Everybody operates under phenomenal pressure, which ebbs and flows through a season depending on results a little bit.
Sure.
So, yes, there is pressure, but there's always big pressure. And that is just once you accept the job at Chelsea and the rewards that come with it, you are also signing up to the fact that you are now under pressure, like you have probably not, unless you've come from Man United or somewhere, like you've probably not really ever worked under. So, that's the starting point. I think supporters judge the performance of sporting directors differently to how football clubs do. And I do think, and I really don't want to come across as condescending, I do still think there's a slight misunderstanding around sporting directors in football and their level of responsibility. At the end of the day, sporting directors at most clubs fall into two different categories or three different categories. Most, I'd say 90%, are there to fulfill both the wishes of the club and the manager, which is why you see club signings and manager signings. And they are there to use their expertise within that, but they are also there to deliver on the philosophy of the club or the manager too. And therefore, not every single signing, not every single philosophy is their decision on their own. Do you know what I mean? They're there to help carry it out. Whether it be they're there to identify a group of players for the manager then to pick the player, whether they're there to implement a philosophy that the club want to do and try to tally that with what the manager want to do, whether it's a bit simpler and they're literally there to go and chase a target and manage to put him in a seat in front of the manager for the manager to try and convince him to sign. These are all the different things. Now, look, we were told, and I wrote about this when I interviewed them, we were told about the four window thing, about it being unfair to look at them or judge Chelsea's business before the four windows were up. Now, we've obviously been through, is this now the fifth window? We've been through four of them now, haven't we? They have, as a club, spent a lot of money, but they have also brought a lot of money in that time. And there has been, I would say, since it handed over to the sporting directors, more of a discernible plan you can see what they're trying to do. You can see how they're trying to do things in terms of the profile, the youth, how they've tried to build that squad. Now, some of that has had to marry against what managers have wanted to do, and also maybe what owners have wanted to do. And that's where things can get a little bit, things can clash a little bit, I would say. And you end up with people like Axel Disasi, who can't really play for Enzo Maresca. So having come in whenever it was he came in, he's now available, which looks messy, but does happen in places. I don't think they'll come under pressure like say if Chelsea finish 8th, Maresca will undoubtedly be under pressure then, because they'd finished 2 places worse off than Pochettino. I'm not saying Maresca would get sacked, but he would be under pressure. I don't think the pressure on the sporting directors would be quite the same. I don't think their positions would be in jeopardy. From what I know, maybe that might change.
Yeah,
I mean,
interesting.
what I would say is I used to hear an awful lot of this around Michael Emenalo and, to a lesser degree, Marina Granovskaya. You know, they went through some very good windows. They went through some very difficult, bad windows too. And from window to window, they went from being geniuses to they should be sacked. Now, their entire body of work now looked at, I think everyone agrees, is pretty good for both of them. But the ebb and flow happened with them. I remember vividly people complaining very hard to me about Michael Emenalo or about Marina and this deal not getting done or that deal not getting done or this player not getting signed. I get it. But I do think clubs look at it differently from supporters on that.
All right, let's take our final ad break, and we will come back to kind of close this one out with a few lightning round questions. Thanks to the sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right, a few lightning round questions from our beloved Discord audience. We did just answer Satchet's question about the sporting directors being under any sort of pressure. I think there's a kind of a lot here in terms of the sporting structure and how that looks and feels. I think, just to kind of close out on that point, Matt, 5 windows in, coming up on a 6th, surely there is kind of however you kind of bucket them in their job responsibilities, surely there is a grade coming up with this much runway at their, kind of behind them, that they're not just new to the club anymore, right? This isn't like, hey, we got to give them a grace period to ensure that, we're not sacking these guys too early like we have with managers. We're now, a couple years in, right? And there are some players that have clearly worked that they've gotten right. And there are clearly a number of players that they haven't gotten right. And I guess my kind of question to end this one is, what's an acceptable grade for guys in their position making the money and decisions that they are making on a day-to-day basis when the club's performance has been not that great?
Well, look, it's funny actually, because do you remember last season, at the end of the season, when we were all talking about Pochettino's performance review? I remember writing then that the sporting directors would not have their own performance review. So that told me everything at the time I needed to know, that that the manager's performance was going to be reviewed, but the sporting director's performance wasn't. And that's because they were carrying out what the club wanted them to carry out at the time. I don't want to get into grading them, if I'm honest with you. I think that's very difficult.
Oh, don't worry, we're going to do that later ourselves. But yeah, I mean, but you understand what I'm saying, right? Like,
if Chelsea do not finish in a Champions League place this season, whether people are under pressure or not, or their jobs in jeopardy, there's going to be some difficult conversations, and there's going to be people who are going to have to sort of put their hands up to some mistakes if Chelsea do not qualify for a Champions League place this season. That doesn't mean they're getting sacked. It doesn't mean that they're going to sort of all of a sudden get replaced. But clearly, difficult conversations and some admissions or some concessions are going to have to be made if Chelsea do not qualify for the Champions League. No matter what Maresca says about it not being a target, the owners put it in the programme at the final game of last season that consistently being in the Champions League is a target. And I do think that. But we are in February. No, yeah, we're basically in February, right at the end of January. I know Chelsea are in a bad run. I know there's a lot of questions around it, but they are currently in a Champions League qualification pace. They are looking like they'll win the Europa Conference League. Ho ho, I know, but it's still a competition. They are still in the FA Cup. In 1 month's time, that could look very different. But trying to work out currently where they may or may not be in terms of their performance at the end of the season is nigh on impossible at the moment, because depending on how the rest of the season goes will massively shape how people feel about that. And 2 months ago, when things were looking very good for Chelsea and people wanted to talk about title races, I didn't want to talk about title race. You didn't want to talk about title race. Lots of fans didn't want to talk about title race, but outside pundits wanted to try and put Chelsea in the title race. A lot of what the sporting directors were doing did look quite good at that point. So it'd be hypocritical of me on the back of a few results to suddenly turn around and start hammering them at the moment. Let's see where they are at the end of the season. I get, and I totally get it. This is a conversation that's going on among fans and journalists and people of clubs up and down the country, and I totally get it. By the way, I'm not trying to say it's not an issue. It is an issue, but I don't want to get into how they should be judged or where they should be judged when I don't really know where they're going to finish the season.
A question that we got from Forrest here is, as we're thinking about the squad, I mean, there's been roughly 190 million pounds spent on wingers, and the winger performance has been average to below average in terms of actual production this year. I think you look at goals and assists from those wide areas that Maresca is desperate to have, and there's just not been that much. I think Noni Madueke is the only one who's really quote unquote performing in terms of those results, but then you look at some of his off the ball stuff and it's not that good. I guess, is there any thought, have you heard anything about moving Palmer back toward that right side for the second half of the season and potentially slotting in whoever
because this is why the whole thing about them chasing this forward and potential left winger has come about, because the feeling is that by committing Neto more to the right hand side and bringing in someone they feel can make an impact on the left will hopefully have a big impact on the performance of those wingers. I'm starting to wonder whether
Neto's not performing that well, though.
I know, but I think there's a belief, and I share it a little bit. I spoke a bit on this. He's filling in sometimes on the left at the moment, and he never looks comfortable to me on the left. I think they would like to commit to him more being a right-sider when he plays. But I agree, he's been a real disappointment for me. He has been a real disappointment so far. I also don't know whether the constant rotation of them is helping. It's quite clever in theory, having four that you rotate around, sometimes on a match-by-match basis, and sometimes 2 matches here, 2 matches there. I don't know whether that's really helping them. Surely it's not helping anyone build relationships within the team. Surely it's not helping their confidence and momentum. It feels like they're being moved around unnecessarily too much to me. And that, I mean, for instance, Madueke has his sort of bad stuff, i.e. his off-the-ball stuff and his switching off when he does something good. He can go missing afterwards. I totally agree. But he is producing the best output of them too. Maybe he would just benefit from being stuck with a little bit more and being encouraged a little bit more. I don't know whether the constant rotation is working, but I agree. They've been, as a group, they've not given the stats and numbers that were certainly hoped of them and expected. And I think Neto has been a real disappointment so far. His output is just nowhere near good enough at the moment. I think Sancho in flashes has been quite good, but he's been a bit inconsistent. But I think for a lone player, an obligation 25 million, he's actually probably been better than I thought he would be in spells. I didn't expect much of him, though, to be honest with you.
He's
I wasn't massively excited by the signing. But then
he's
they need more
probably
from
the
him.
one. He's probably the one I'm least worried about, like just in terms of what that left side could end up becoming. But you look at the output across the board, and of course now the Mudryk question is a complete other thing. But this is really you go from thinking that you have so much depth in this position to like, what are you actually going to get out of this for the season? Can you get
But
20
I
total goal contributions out of this group? I don't know.
they love Maresca loves playing Palmer in the middle, and Palmer loves playing in the middle. So it might not be wise to shift him. I do get it though, because you're still probably going to get 20 goals a season from Palmer on the right, and that would allow you to potentially bring in Joao Felix or Nkunku into the middle, who you would imagine would have a better output currently than, or certainly Neto out wide. So I get it. I get that's a way to try and solve it. But I just get the feeling that
Uh,
neither Maresca or Palmer really wants to move. But yeah, that would be the most sensible thing to do, or the most obvious thing to do.
Two last questions about kind of more of the business side of things. So, update on the stadium at all?
We've been here, haven't we? And until we know exactly what's happening with the ownership thing, that's obviously been parked in terms of whether it's going to remain the same or whether one side is going to eventually buy out the other side. I think the stadium just is in gridlock until the moment that happens. I know the CPO. Did the CPO have an AGM recently? I think Jason Gannon was there. All I would say is I only hear. I've never met him. I've never spoken to him. Literally never even messaged him. So I have no skin in the game. But all I hear about Jason Gannon is good things. Everyone who I know has been in meetings with him or had to deal with him speaks well of him, speaks highly of him, thinks that he is a very competent person to lead it. Unfortunately, my belief is until we know for sure where the ownership is heading in terms of whether it stays the same or not, I think the stadium is gridlocked until that point.
Last question for this January window. Chelsea kind of currently sitting outside of the Champions League spots, right? So, just saying that out loud. Is our front of shirt sponsor in jeopardy? Also, I would throw the potential Jordan deal in with that. Um, Gone radio silent since kind of October-ish. What's going on?
I've given up on it. I've just got bored of it. I'll be totally honest. I mean, at the start of the season, it's something that interested me, and I used to chase around on it and talk to people about it. I kept getting told we're in this negotiation, we're in that negotiation. Something might happen, something might not happen. It's we'll negotiate something better if we do it when people know that we're going to be back in the Champions League. I got that. I still get that, but I've just become so bored with it. I'll be honest with you. I've given up on it. And what will be with the sponsor. Given we're in February, I find it hard to think that there'll now be a sponsor comes in for the end of the season. I don't see why they would. It feels to me that everything is now aimed at trying to get a blue chip sponsor with the dangle of Champions League qualification to try and get the very biggest deal. Obviously, if Chelsea slide down the table, that's going to make that more
Yeah.
difficult. I've never really known on the Jordan thing, if I'm honest with you. That's felt like a lot of speculation around that. I'm sure there's some merit to it. Nobody's ever wanted to talk about it. It's felt like, and I think Tottenham have had the same thing with the Jordan thing as well. Oh, are we going to be the next Jordan club? Feels like a lot of speculation at the moment.
Okay, let's wrap there. Thank you for the end
Cool.
of window commentary here, Matt. We will, of course, be back with one last special before Monday's match against West Ham, because, of course, we play on deadline day. Why wouldn't we? And, and of course, that's Graham Potter's return. So there you go. No storylines to be written. But look, lots of good stuff coming out this week and next, coming up on trip deadline. So if you're listening at the end of this and you're like, hey, want to talk to those guys about going to London, the 31st is kind of our tentative deadline. Message us. We'll get you started with Excel Tours and take it from there. But until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.